Liqian.
Yeah, thank you. And I first, my name is Zhou Liqian from Department of Philosophy, Shanghai Jiaotong University. My background is philosophy science. In past few years, I have interest in understanding of information, intelligence, cognition, and mind from the perspective of biology, especially biosemiotics. I attended my first biosemiotic gathering in 2015 in Copenhagen. I was very impressed by a presentation on biosemiotics of plant given by Yogi. So when I knew that this gathering will be organized by Yogi, so I think I should do something to acknowledge that presentation, although even for now, I want to read that paper, but I haven't. I don't know what happened to that paper, to that presentation. So at this time, I will talk about a plant mind, where the plant has mind. Actually, this is in past 2 decades, there is really a war on plant cognition, where the plant has cognition. There's a Edinburgh biocognist published paper in 2005 says that plant actually is not only biochemical interactions, but has intelligence, which launches a very field investigating the cognitive behaviors in plants. But it also faced lots of objections from, I would say, traditional plant scientists. They argue against a lot. See, there are 33 plants published a short letter to argue that, yeah, this plant neurobiology is a pseudoscience because they think that plants not only is cognitive, but also have some kind of neural systems like human beings or like animals. So the war is still going on today. If anyone wants to read this, there's a very nice book published in 2022 by Paco Kawa. So uh, the approach they employed to approach plant cognition is comparative cognition. They try to argue through the framework of animal cognition, like they try to defend that plants can learn, has memory, and also even decision making. They try to put the phenomena of plants into the framework of animal cognition. So, and I think this sometimes is not very persuasive because there are many huge differences between plants and animals. For example, maybe there are movements of plants, but really they do not have action because action depends on individuality. And the individuality of animals depends on the unified body, while plants have no such unified body because they are modular. So I think of this idea, maybe we should approach this mind of plant in terms of biosemiotics. Maybe we should throw away all the framework of cognition and think of cognition, mind in terms of biosemiotics. So, so I think that if we want to see whether plants has mind, let's find a mark of the metal. In philosophy, they think that there is a mark of the metal is intentionality. So does plant has a mind? To answer the question, we need to sort out the necessary and sufficient conditions for having a mind. Many philosophers since Brentano believe that intentionality is a mark of the metal. Of course, this mark is debatable, but I think at least good candidate we can start with. So what is intentionality? Intentionality is the power of mind to be about to represent or stand for things, properties, and state of affairs. It means it's in semiosis. So does plant have intentionality? If we formulate this question in this way, I think, it's a very simple answer. I have a very simple argument for that. There are lots of plant signaling pathways in plant. So I just cited a sentence from a review of plant signaling. Plant growth and development are regulated by the plant hormones, small molecule metabolites that have evolved signaling function. For example, this is wood signaling. When there's a wooding as part of a plant, they will generate, this is a paper just published on Cell last year, then they will send a kind of signal to the plant, and then the plant will respond by regeneration. And also, the more signaling phenomena we know is tropism. Plants also respond with changes in morphology and physiology to a remarkable range of external signals, light, of course, and many others, including temperature, moisture, infection, and touch. Here's a phototropism. And also plant communicates interspecies and interspecies through lateral organic components. This is also very important when there's a leaf eaten or damaged by some insects. The plant will release some VOC, and as plants receive the VOC and then build some kind of defending strategy. So signals transmit information, and information is about something. Thus, plant signals represent. As a result, plant has intentionality, and therefore plant has mind and mental states. So I don't know why people have problems about plant having minds. And of course, there are objections coming in the way. Some people said, oh, yeah, I know you must be some, outside of plant. When we're using these concepts of signaling, of represent, or perceive, or sense, or response, actually, we just use them in a metaphorical way. The concepts are used in a technical sense. It's just a way to characterize the correlation between different parts of plant having nothing to do with the content or aboutness. So, of course, some biochemical signals, hormones, are specialized to perform the correlation function. Nevertheless, plant signalings are just biochemical processes which can be analyzed by informational terms. I mean, by Shannon terms, purely formal, purely mathematical. For example, the wood signaling is just it's very clear there are some biochemical interactions between different elements in plants. And second, there see that in philosophy of mind, when people talk about intentionality, they always talk about belief, and belief is in the form of proposition. So plant neither talk nor have language. It is intuitively absurd to talk about plant intentionality unless using these terms in some metaphorical ways. For example, when I first give a talk on plant cognition, a very distinguished professor said, trees have mind, have cognition, or also stones have. It's nonsense for them. So we may argue that against that philosophy of mind is occupied by some anthropocentric ideas. And of course, I think we should keep our mind open to other types of intentionality like animal signals. I think now there are more and more people accept that animals have mind, have cognition. So what about plant? Let's open our mind. So I find an alternative approach actually is semiotics. So Actually, there are very few people in philosophy of mind talks about semiotics, but originally Peirce developed semiotics to explain this very property of mind, intentionality. I cited Thomas Short. Although semiotics is widely used in fields like literature, art, communication, media, and social science, Charles Sanders Peirce's original aim in developing semiotics was to construct a naturalistic yet non-reductive account of the human mind, explaining its extraordinary capacity for intentionality. So this is precisely, I think, what naturalistic theory of intentionality seek to achieve. So this is ABC of semiotics. I think most of us very familiar with that. So briefly, to be assigned, something must be represent something to some interpreter in some respect. I will not go into detail. So, and also to be assigned, Liqian summarizes the condition as the representative conditions, the interpretive condition, the presentative condition, and the triadic condition. And also, Peirce, in philosophy of mind, or even philosophy of science, even in this very analytical philosophy, when we talk about representation, we only have a very single type of representation, the representation and the represented. But it is not the case according to Peirce semiotics. He has a very nice classification of a representation. As here, I just employ the classification according to the representative characters. So according to the manner in which a sign correlates with its object and such represents an object, Peirce classified signs into icons, indices, and symbols. I will not think here is the icon of the male and female. Here it is the icon depends on the similarities between the sign and its represented. The indices is defined by its special temporal or causal correlations between the represented sign and the represented. And also here comes symbols. The symbols, the typical example is the reference relationships are purely arbitrary and conventional. So as we can see, interpretation plays a central role in making a sign meaningful. I said also from Dickens that the central dogma of semiotics. Any property of a physical medium can serve as a sign vehicle of any type, icon, index, or symbol referring to any object or reference for whatever function or purpose, because these properties are generated by and entirely depend upon the form of the particular interpretive process that it is incorporated into. So I think why people in philosophy of mind or in philosophy overlook semiotics, it has this central dogma of interpretation. So despite Peirce semiotics being a sophisticated theory of intentionality, most philosophers overlook it. And I think they have very strong and reasonable reasons for this. First, appealing to interpretation, especially interpretation is individual. To explain the normativity of intentionality seems to postpone the real question without answering it. Within the semiotic framework, the real problem appears to be explaining the competence of interpretation, something semiotics assumes rather than addresses. Second, as Barbieri argues, appealing to interpretation may not align with naturalism. While Peirce semiotics provides a descriptive explanation of semiosis, the mechanism behind how semiosis is possible are left unexplained. And Barbieri even argues that semiotic, is about the split between code biology and biosemiotics, because he's really dislikes the idea that biosemiotics, it has some kind of align with teleology, with the vitalism in some sense. So to argue for biosemiotics to be science, we should provide a naturalistic account of interpretation. So I try to, following Deakin's approach, I try to formulate interpretation in the context of life. I think to understand interpretation naturalistically, I begin with the primitive form in the context, a primitive form of science or semiotics in the context of life. So organisms are highly structured systems which are self-generating, self-maintaining, and self-persistent. So to see organism is self-generating, it means that the parts and structure of organisms are generated by itself. Self-organization, some people may argue that, yeah, it has nothing, it is okay. Self-organization is also auto-generating. So what's the difference? I think different from self-organization, living processes are not only order-generating, but also self-maintaining. Although self-organization is order or structure-generating, it is self-devastating, that is, the structure it generates is the most efficient way to devastate the very process itself. This is argued by Terence Deakin. So while the processes and structure in organisms mutually support the organism continuously persistent, this makes organisms intrinsically purposive systems in counting sense. Furthermore, organisms are not static maintaining, but dynamically stable. It is called a homeostasis traditionally. So to keep the homeostasis, organism has to make sense of themselves and the surrounding environment. These sense-making processes, I think, are primitive interpreting process. So to see an organism, some people say that, yeah, you make sense of. It's interpretive. It's some kind of psychology definition. So to see an organism make sense of something, it is not necessary that there is a meta process modulating the basic biochemical processes within the organism. The biochemical processes reciprocally sustaining the organism are sense-making process. Organisms are constituted by processes reciprocally support and generate each other. In turn, each process prevent others from self-devastating, unlike what happened in self-organization. That is, it intrinsically, cited from Deakin, embodies and maintains its own boundary conditions while component processes and reciprocally produce the external boundary conditions for each other. Furthermore, it repairs and replicates the critical boundary conditions required to repair and replicate these same critical boundary conditions. We may see that the embodied boundary conditions in organisms carry structural information about the organisms themselves. This structural information is made sense of in present and future self-generating and self-maintaining. We may also see that the structural organisms constrain the possibilities, the processes proceeding in the organisms. The processes are constrained to proceed in the way contributing to the self-generating and self-maintaining of the organisms themselves. So someone may argue that this constraining process is not special. It also happens in many physical processes. It is called path dependence. That is, things always continue from what history has shaped. It is different of the constraints in organisms from those in non-living processes because the structural information is normative with respect to the self-maintaining of life. Next, I will argue that this self-generating processes, this very primitive of living processes, are iconic representation. So in generating, we may see that an organism makes sense of structural information because it is iconic, the structure and elements produced in self-generating are similar to the existed and past structures and elements. This is iconic process. The generating and the continuing structure and the generated elements are similar to the existed and past corresponding structure and elements. And these similarities are interpreted in most primitive sense by self-generating processes. So in this sense, living organisms are representation of themselves. In this case, I see this is operational interpretation. That is, it represents itself, making the inheritance self-referential. Secondly, this satisfies the conditions of being assigned. Thirdly, the dynamic organisms are physically determined as such mechanistically aligning with modern scientific methods and experimental feasibility. So because of this reason, I call it operational interpretation. So what about indexical representation in life? So I think maybe a primitive form of indexical representation may origin in the semiotic interaction with surrounding environment. To keep its homeostasis, an organism must need substrates to continue the reciprocal processing in it. So primitives must develop a way to identify the substrates out of it. And this contributes to the very primitive indexical representation. So although indexical representation is a novel form of representation, it is hierarchically depends on the iconic processes. So to be indexically represent the needed substrate through the sense medium, it needs three types of iconic representation. First, for the organism, the media is isomorphic to the needed substrate. Second, the sense of the media is similar to the past sense of the same kind. And third, the medium always correlated with the needed substrate in the past. This is actually, formulated in Dickens' way. So I will just go around this objection. So I think with this formulation of iconic and indexical representation, we can go back to the plant signaling and think of them as a semiosis. So I will not go this. So being isolated from the self-generated plant, phototropism are biochemically mechanistic. However, I think tropism is normative with respect to self-generating and self-maintaining plant. It should be understood as a meaning-making process. So I think phototropism is operationally indexical representation of light influence. First, the photosignaling complex formed by elements is isomorphic to the low influence of light. Second, photosignaling complex is similar to the complex operationally embodied in the structure and constraint of the plant shoot. Third, photosignaling complex has always correlated with the low influence of light in the past. Therefore, photosignaling complex operationally indicates the light influence. I just gives its very brief argument for how to understand the plant signaling as semiosis. I just have some very few concluding. I will not read it because time is up, and I think everybody is waiting for the party. So I will end here. Thank you.
All right, let's take 2 minutes for 2 questions. Questions? Don't be shy. Yes.
I want to go back to the part where we talk about plant neuroscience. And I want to defend the idea that we can actually do plant neuroscience as opposed to what seems to be, I think, the biosemiotic consensus. I've heard the opinion a couple of times that, no, we should not engage in this because it's too anthropomorphic or it's too based on human thought. Yogi has called it using the language of the masters. But I want to push back a little bit against our own consensus. when we talk about plant neuroscience, it's because we recognize that there are very similar biological mechanisms.
Yeah,
to-
a lot of matter, yeah.
Particularly in non-embodied theories of cognition, which is, I think that we ourselves have not explored properly. Say, when we think about the calcium release in a plant, we can see how it mirrors neuronal structures or neuronal firings. And I think that's very different to what happens, say, at the singular cellular level. And perhaps we need to be more careful or to have a different theory for how we talk about sign usage at the lower levels as compared to more complex, highly evolved levels such as plants. So I just wanted to push back a little bit on that.
Yeah. I just want to, put aside this debate on the whether cellular system is neurological or not, because I think, we still it is still some kind of zone centric, because we try to think of plant cognition in terms of animal cognition, and maybe I think the cognition concepts actually we use in past decades are problematic. And if we think of if we combine cognition with neural systems, we have a problem that cognition may come from nowhere. There must be some continuity from the different species. As maybe biosemiotics is a better approach. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well,
I was just going to say about jellyfish. Jellyfish are radial design,
Yeah.
bilateral. So here we have cellular signaling, and then we have plants. These models have to communicate and make what it can be seen in those terms. So like the jellyfish distributed protein grains.
Yeah.
So that's not the same as us, because it moves away. Jellyfish can put it into a bilateral design. So with the plants, we have distributed.
Yeah, I agree.